the last training video, wait. I've probably made the most changes with Rarely, having to kind of experiment with how to work on getting some, physical changes in coordination. So I did months of lunging where she gained a little bit of control over her emotional stability. And then I think in the last training video, I had just switched her to doing the small circles on the long reins, and it was in the halter. And since then, I've had to play around with it a little bit, because what I'm looking for when we sort of find the right exact combination for the horse of equipment, exercise, speed, all of that, you start to see changes, at least hints of changes right away. So when she was escalating anxiety and defensiveness, I would start experimenting, switching it up, experimenting a little bit. And what we landed on that's worked pretty consistently is going to the bridle. I was still on the small circles at the walk and just putting her in the bridle instead of the halter, because her nose was getting a little bit rubbed in the halter. And because when she drops her back, she tends to shorten her neck upward, as opposed to Rafalco and Lexi, that when they drop their back, they tend to curl the neck forward and down. It's the same issue in the back, but each horse can have a little different use of the neck when they start to shorten the neck muscles. So Rarely goes straight up when she drops her back, shortens her neck, which is just normal, typical, high-headed, anxious horse, right? So when I put her in the bridle, she started to pay more attention internally and was less distracted with whatever was going on externally. And she tried to lengthen her neck a little bit more. So I stuck with the bridle. But then again, when her anxiety started building, I thought, what if I'm asking too much of the hindquarters just yet? Because my main goal with Rarely is to just get out of anxiety, just get into the learning frame of mind. But for some horses, that means we have to make some improvements in the skeletal coordination or the physical balance, because it's not all mental emotional. It's not all behavioral. So where Rarely made some improvements on the lunge line, I gave it plenty of time. She still couldn't get really an A+, which makes me suspect she has a physical coordination that's sort of not helping her feel safe in her own skin or comfortable. So going to the long reins immediately as sort of the most opposite groundwork exercise you can do started to make some improvements. Then putting her in a snaffle bit and bridle, and it's a full cheek snaffle with keepers, so it's very steady, which really helps isolate the rein action on the left and right rein, which can be very useful. Also, with the pressure on the lower jaw instead of the nose, like the halter, you get a little bit more detail in the coordination and the feel. It just gets a little bit more precise, and I think the precision has helped her. Then going out on the big circles, and she's still walking fast and distracted. So again, not a big improvement. So I also played with Trot. So when she's distracted like that, and she starts off looking a little off at the trot, and I'm not sure if that's tightness or lameness. The farrier was just here. There were no issues with her feet. But this little bit of head bob has shown up in the last 2 sessions. And it comes and goes only during work. We don't see it the rest of the time. So when I ask for Trot, my sole purpose of asking her to trot right now is just to let her spend a little bit of pent-up energy. And I can still give her the same support with the long reins at the trot as I can the walk. So if her ears are half back and she's sort of concentrating, then I leave her alone. It's only when she starts to increase her energy level, coupled with more and more distraction, that bumping her up to trot has seemed to just help kind of work like a pressure release valve. And she's not going crazy in Trot. It's just giving her relief. And in Trot, the back muscles don't have to work quite as hard as they do in the walk to get the same balance. So it could be bringing her some physical relief to go to Trot. Sometimes she offers to trot. Some days she'll trot for 15 minutes and just get calmer and feel better because of it. So every day's been a little different how much trot we do. And it's just, I kind of watch the anxiety, energy, and where her ears are pointed to know. Like here with her ears half back, even though she's a bit fast and quick at the walk, she's trying to lengthen the neck. And those ears half back tell me she's paying attention. And I forgot to look at my watch, but we're probably, we'll say 5 minutes into it. I'm going to try to do 20 minutes. If we don't get enough of can't really see enough of a change, then I'll go a little longer. But typically by the 15-minute mark, she starts really lengthening the neck more and more, and she starts to find more calm energy. So sometimes she just wants to walk fast like this. Sometimes she'll trot for the first 10-15 minutes. Sometimes she'll just trot a little bit. And when the trot's a little bit pokey like that, and especially if it looks a little off, then I don't ask for trot very often, but just enough to help her kind of spend some of that pent-up anxiety energy, maybe relax the back muscles a little, and she can come back to the walk whenever she likes. And it's been very interesting, which is, it kind of explains why she couldn't lengthen her neck on the lunge line, is when she starts to lengthen her neck on the long reins, you'll see she has an outside bend. So just as she starts to let go of that shortening and kind of excess contraction through her neck, which goes all the way through the back, all the way through the hindquarter to the tail as a chain of soft tissues that all intertwine. When she tries to lengthen the neck, she either really has to speed up or she's falling forward to the point that I have to give her a little more outside rein support, and that happens to put her neck to the outside right now. So when you're trying to keep the inside rein straight and stable, you're adjusting the outside rein. And if the horse winds up with a little bit of an outside neck bend, all that tells us is how unstable the back and hindquarters are, that she really isn't using them for the purpose they're intended. So the outside bend is a little bit because of how I'm using the outside rein, but I'm having to use the outside rein that way because she's falling, her body weight's falling in and forward on the circle so much. And as she lengthens the neck, and probably will need to slow down just a tick to really use her hind legs to control her own body weight, the transition will be a long neck at the same time the neck straightens out and the bend goes away. So the outside bend is really kind of a consequence of being very disengaged, not using the back the way it's supposed to be used. And it just sort of tells us, no matter what we see, that when they're putting that much slack on the inside rein, they're really not using their back and hindquarters the way they're supposed to. So as we give them the support and maybe even allow some we have to allow the outside bend because that's just where it's got to go for her to get her body weight in the right place internally. As the body weight more appropriately distributed stabilizes for her, as she gets a little better at it, the neck will straighten on its own without slack on the inside rein and lengthen. And I always thought it was interesting because with her head to the outside, theoretically, if I were feeling the mouth, then this rein would be tight with her head to the outside. But it's not. When her neck is straight, the inside rein is very loose. That tells me the body weight is falling forward and in. And even when I pull the outside rein with her head to the outside, I'm just pulling it enough, barely enough to straighten the inside rein. Then I know her weight has shifted. So it's kind of a complicated exercise to understand, especially when the horse looks like they're bent the wrong way. But we'll kind of see as she gets into this, she'll be a great example, because I think by the time I started putting my other horses on the playlist, they had all gotten stable enough through their back and hindquarters that they really didn't have an outside bend. But rarely, just starting, especially on the bigger circles, she's going to have an outside bend to her neck a lot until she gets more stable through the pelvis and the back. And we'll probably see her pay more attention. We'll see the energy calm down. At the same time, the neck lengthens and straightens out. And right now, we're getting hints of it. So those little hints are what tell me, keep going with this exercise. Because physically, it's just like us going to the gym. It's still going to take repetition. It's going to take practice. It's, changing coordination is a big ass deal. It's not that easy for horses, just like it's not easy for us. So any changes like that, when I gave her the bridle and the bigger circle and played with Trot intermittently, I started to get more and more of her keeping her attention on what we're doing rather than what her buddies are doing. She started to play with her speed a little bit, and that pushing on the bit is really her first sort of early attempts at lengthening the neck, right? So I don't want to discourage that at all. I let the reins slide a little bit when she pushes on the bit like that, or roots, they call it, rooting, right? If she gets too high-headed, too distracted, too anxious for, half a circle or a circle, then I can bump her up into Trot. That seems to get her to focus again, spends a little pent-up energy, little anxiety, and then she's sort of thinking. Right now, ears half out, neck pretty long, still a little bent to the outside. All of that is what I'm hoping she finds, is what I'm helping her find. It's what we're looking for. And so playing around with different size circles, transitions, using the halter, using the bridle. It's like every horse has kind of a unique combination. You can think of it like a combination lock. And as you kind of get the right pieces together, you start to see the changes that you're looking for. And for Rarely, I need to see the neck long and have her actually in the posture of long and low, because it's very hard for her to maintain calm energy. So to help her really gain and strengthen the learning frame of mind, we have to begin on some rudimentary changes regarding her skeletal coordination, or she's not going to figure it out, right? And she's in her late teens, so it's not a matter of getting older and wiser and calmer. I go, some horses, and she's a great example, they're 15 going on 2. They just still act like 2-year-olds. They don't feel internally safe. They don't feel comfortable in their motion or in their own skin. So they're perpetually defensive, perpetually under stress. And reducing stress, right? So when we're in the fight-flight nervous system, it's technically called a stress response, and that can become chronic. And when the parasympathetic, the rest and digest nervous system, is dominant, then we have what's called a relaxation response. Totally different energy. So fight and flight are just versions of different stress responses, where the learning frame of mind means we're getting a relaxation response, right? And so most of the horses I work on in rehab have a little bit of both, a physical challenge as well as sort of a mental, emotional habit or pattern associated with the chronic stress. So the 3 months of the learning frame of mind work was just to have a crack through at that chronic stress, but we didn't do a lot of motion. It was either a controlled walk or halt, but we got 3 months of really cracking through that chronic stress. Then when we shifted into groundwork, right, it all kind of fell apart and took an additional 4 months of just letting her act out, express herself, do her thing at the end of a lunge line without too many directions, without any criticism. And really the only thing I asked her to do was either go left or go right. But if she trotted or cantered, I didn't slow her down. If she walked, I didn't ask her to speed up. Everything was sort of up to her. And it took that long for her to just stabilize enough that she sort of went from extreme to moderate, right? But she couldn't really get to balance. She couldn't really consistently be calm and thoughtful. So that told me I had a little bit of a physical something that she's struggling with. So putting her on the long reins on a tiny circle, that's going to make straightness difficult, but it's going to encourage engagement of the hindquarters right away. And usually horses like her that rush and bolt and run away, they're not controlling their balance very well with the hindquarters. So I started there. It worked pretty well. That's what I put on the last training video. And then since then, it didn't work so well for a session or two, so I switched to the bridle. That worked for several sessions. Then it wasn't working so well, so I switched to bigger circles. Right? And then that worked some of the time, but I also found I needed to incorporate a little trot. Not forcing her to trot, but if I ask her to trot, sometimes she just keeps going. So there's some benefit in there that's helping her feel better. If she doesn't keep going, I don't make her keep going. And I give her a little chance in between the trots. I really save the trot transition as a stress relief valve, not to make her tired, but just to kind of let a pent-up energy go out, give the back muscles a little relief, and it seems to help her. But what's interesting is as we've played with Trot, there's also a little deviation of movement coming up where she looks a little bit lame, a little bit head bobby at the trot. And some of the trots have been beautiful. Some of them are lethargic. And that little bit of offness has only shown up in the past week or so. And like I said, the farrier was just here, checked out her feet. So it's not that. But it could be very well that she's just changing the coordination, changing the muscle use. And at trot, over concussion can make it look a little bit off. So I don't think she's having a painful lameness episode. She's just, when they're off at the trot, I don't trot too much. And sometimes she goes from looking a little off at the trot to looking fine. But if she's happy to walk and the trot doesn't look great, I just let her walk. I go either way. We're just trying to gain some hindquarter and back stability. Oops, I forgot I left my phone in my pocket. There, so we're just going to see what she does. I think I'm coming into about the 20-minute mark. And we'll give it a little bit more time. So when she looks good at the trot and she doesn't look a little off and she chooses to trot for like 10 minutes, that seems to be the fastest path for her to feel relief and kind of settle down and put her mind in the game. Today, I'm not comfortable asking her to trot too much because each time I do, she just looks a tiny bit off to me. So it may take a little longer, but there, that pushing on the bit, that lengthening of the neck tells me we're getting the changes we're looking for. And the reason watching the neck is important is because it's part of a chain of soft tissues all through the spine and around the pelvis. And we can't see it in the back and the hindquarters because it's deep under where we can't see it. But the use of those same top line muscles around the spine and the pelvis is reflected in the use of the neck. So where I'm alternating pressure between the left and right rein, right? I'm not trying to tell her to have her head high or low. I'm just seeing what she does with it. And when she pushes on the bit like that and tries lengthening the neck, that's usually kind of like that change of coordination comes in fits and starts, and it's not always smooth and graceful. So that's the beginning of her changing the muscle tone in the top line chain of soft tissues. And I say soft tissues because it's more than just muscle. You've got the big giant nuchal ligament, you've got all kinds of tendons, and so it's really a chain of soft tissues. And the use of those soft tissues, how much or how little tension is in them, whether they're shortening or lengthening, is directly related to whether the spine is pushing down or the spine is lifting up, whether the hindquarters are engaged or they're unstable and disengaged. So we can kind of watch the neck, but it's really the last thing to change in that chain of soft tissues from the tail head through the top of the hindquarter, all the way through the back, through the withers, through the shoulders, and then the neck changes as the very last piece. So that change in her neck, you can see when she lengthens, it's a little less bent to the outside. If she's really high-headed like that, then we see a drastic outside bend, right? And that outside bend is because she's dropping the back, losing the hindquarters. So give her a little bit more time, but very slowly. Like, this is going to take a lot of repetition. It took a little bit of time, probably this past month. I've been changing up sort of the components of what I'm doing. I've stayed on the long reins, but sort of changed up the path of travel, changed up the equipment, changed up between transitions or directional changes, things like that, to try to find the path of least resistance for Rarely, just to feel comfortable enough and safe enough in her own skin that she's not so distracted and so anxious. And the long reins is going to get the biggest change. The lunge line is really a you figure it out to the horse kind of exercise, where the long reins I can give as much guidance as if I were riding, but I can also stay off her back, stay out of her way, and let her explore in whatever way she wants, whether it's too fast, too slow, even bucking, rearing, bolting, whatever she throws at me, we can just kind of keep moving through. And I don't have to criticize her, I don't have to give her heavy aids, and she's pretty sensitive to heavy aids. She really doesn't like things to get too restrictive or she gets more anxious. And when it's just enough feel to help her stabilize and give her some guidance, she gets calmer and calmer the longer we go. Yeah, and you can see from how frequently, like, she plays a little bit with that lengthening of the neck, but she's really, okay, if she starts yelling for her buddies, that's usually a sign that we need a little bit of trot. Whoop, or a little bit of canter. Yeah, so again, I'm not expecting it to be good. I'm not expecting it to do anything other than, like, her sense of safety is through flight. So she's a flight defensive horse, which means the movement can help her calm down. Right? If horses are more prone to snarkiness, then the movement can kind of wind them up. But for her, as long as I can support her, then having a little bit of trot seems to help. Okay. And she's not changing too much. I'm going to keep recording. I think we're just past we're at the 25-minute mark, and we'll just give her 5 more minutes this direction, and maybe play with Trot a little bit more. Like I said, I don't like that she looks a little bit off. It doesn't look horrible, and she's not showing any signs of lameness before she trots, whether it's in the paddock or in the stall. She just is working through something at the trot. And it doesn't get worse, it just kind of remains that little bit of offness. But again, even though the trot's not great, it just seems to help her refocus. So I'll try a little bit more. And if she wants to canter, that's fine too. And the main difference between walk and trot is that in the trot, the back muscles don't do nearly the same amount of work that they have to do for stability of the spine in the walk. So in the walk, the back muscles work quite hard, which could be why she gets a little tight, or she looks a little off, or she gets a little anxious. So not only is the trot sort of giving her an energy release, it's giving her physically less work, more relief through the back muscles and the hindquarter muscles. Even if the trot's not good, it still gives the back muscles a little bit of relief from working so hard. That's better. And we've just got a few more minutes left, I think, so we'll kind of end this direction with a little bit more trot. And you can see that offness keeps coming and going. When she slows down, you can really see it. When she speeds up a little bit, she doesn't look lame. And then when she slows down, she just looks a little off. And all of that can be part of the process of change. So if they're lame walking out of the stall, I don't work them at all. But if it shows up a little bit with a horse like her that is still anxious and tight and fast, I also don't panic when I see it. I keep an eye on it, I kind of monitor it. If it gets a little better or stays the same, then I know it's just part of the process of change. If it starts to get worse and worse, then I know I've got a bigger problem. Yeah. Yeah, a little bit of canter today too. You can kind of see the canter's not super, right? She's pretty hoppy. She gets a little tight in her trot and her canter. And that can be, again, related to muscle use, chronic tightness, how she's using the muscles that should be lengthening for her to control her forward movement are all shortening. So it just gives you this sort of choppy, bouncy, and sometimes explosive trot and canter. So with Rarely, like the more I can see that, even that little improvement of lengthening the neck and straightening out the outside bend is huge. That's what's going to lead her into feeling calmer more and more often, where she can feel safe enough and comfortable enough to start to self-regulate her own behavior. That's the goal. So this is probably what we're going to stick with for a little while. Right? It seems to be working. I'm glad we saw at least a few minutes of it at the end of 30 minutes. And I think that's about 30 minutes, so I'm going to stop the video. But that's where she's at in this training session. Hang on, I got to turn off the camera, sweetheart.